What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. A potpourri kind of episode for you today here on Next Pats. We, of course, will be talking about some of the Patriots' younger players, but I also want to take a little bit of a big picture look at what's happening with the coaching situation as well by looking back. Usually on this year podcast, we're looking ahead, but we're going to look back in order to look ahead. I promise it'll all make sense. It's a great episode. We're also going to hear from you. We've got some mailbag questions to get to. But first, I want to start with something that I heard this week from my good friend and yours, Matt Cassel. Matt Cassel was a quarterback on the 2005 iteration of the New England Patriots, and that is relevant to this year's team because 2005 was the last time, in my opinion, when the Patriots were really in a spot similar to the one they're in now with their Patriots offensive play calling responsibilities. 2005 was the first year the Patriots got after it without Charlie Weis. Charlie Weis had moved on, become a head coach himself. And the Patriots had a relatively unknown offensive assistant, Josh McDaniels, take on what became essentially the de facto offensive coordinator role. Now, what's interesting about what happened in 2005 is that there was a lot of secrecy around what exactly Josh McDaniels was doing and how the offense was going to operate, who was going to be calling plays, a lot of these same questions that we have here today in 2022. And so I made sure to reach out to Cassel and just ask him about how that operation functioned, because you can go back and you can find stories from 2005 and see that even late into that season, it looked like, at least from what I could gather and what I was able to read, that even reporters weren't entirely sure who was calling the offensive plays during that season. Of course, when the Patriots would be asked about it, they would be a little bit dodgy, whether it was McDaniels or Bill Belichick. You know, McDaniels would say things like Bill Belichick is responsible for what gets called offensively, which seems like a nice little way of getting around the fact that he actually was the one specifically calling the plays, which he was, you know, because Bill Belichick's responsible for everything. So that makes sense. And it's a good way to get around that. We know Bill Belichick oftentimes likes to give his assistants these sort of nebulous, or he likes to at least withhold the really lofty title of coordinator, whether it's on the offensive or defensive side, probably for a variety of reasons. From people we've spoken to over the years, it has been everything from salary potentially to just wanting to make sure that there's not too much pressure on these guys when they are in that kind of position in their first year. Anyway, here's what Cassel told me. He did say McDaniels, even though he didn't have the title, was essentially the offensive coordinator that year, and that he, along with Brian Daboll, still on the staff then in 2005, were essentially the passing game coordinators. Meanwhile, Dante Scarnecchia, according to Cassel, was essentially the run game coordinator and the pass protection coordinator. And so out at practice, when you had the quarterbacks and the receivers and the tight ends working together in drills and in 7-on-7 periods, it was McDaniels and Daboll really running the show, and really primarily McDaniels. When it became a run game period or a 9-on-7 period, which they don't do a whole lot of anymore. Usually it's 11-on-11 when they're really focused in on the run at practice. But these 9-on-7 periods that they used to do, Dante Scarnecchia would come in and he would be really running the show, and he would be calling the plays, and he would be telling everyone what was going on. That was his portion of practice. And then when the entire team got together for competitive team drills, 11-on-11 at the end of the practice, usually, then it would be McDaniels who was calling the plays, relaying those plays to Tom Brady. Those plays are the plays that got run. So I find that interesting because what we saw at the first OTA practice that we were allowed to go see was something that was somewhat similar. Joe Judge, the quarterback's coach, ran the 7-on-7s. He was coaching the receivers at times. He was talking to tight ends at times. He was the guy telling Mac Jones what to do in those 7-on-7 moments. When you had the run game period start, it was Matt Patricia, who looks like the offensive line coach, coming in and running that portion of practice the way that Dante Scarnecchia did all those years ago. And then when you got together for everybody getting into a competitive period of 11-on-11, it was actually Bill Belichick who looked to be the one reading off a sheet, giving some sort of instruction to Mac Jones taking that instruction into the huddle, and then the Patriots would run a play. Now, that portion of it surprised Cassel when I spoke to him. And I've written about this on NBCSportsBoston.com. If you haven't read the article, you can go check it out and get more of the details that that I received from Castle in our conversation. But that part with Bill Belichick essentially calling the plays, I know it's just May, but calling the plays, even at this stage of the year, was surprising to Castle, because even with Josh McDaniels having no experience really and being such a lower level assistant prior to that 05 season, he was the guy who was always calling the plays, according to Castle. Castle acknowledged, though, even with Josh McDaniels calling the plays, he had plenty of input from others, namely Bill Belichick and Dante Scarnecchia. Bill Belichick may say something along the lines of, on the headset, as a play, maybe there's some sort of timeout, or maybe a play is just finished and the play clock has started. Bill Belichick may say something like, "Hey, we need a run here. What do you like?" And Dante Scarnecchia might respond with something like, "Okay, I like a gap play here," and then maybe even give a suggestion for a play call. And then Josh McDaniels would find that on his play sheet, relay it to Tom Brady. But it was Josh McDaniels who was in Tom Brady's ear. So, the quarterback's coach and the guy who was running the offensive meetings, essentially, even though everybody had their own specialty, and even though there were plenty of people who had say in what the offense was doing, Dante Scarnecchia, Ivan Fears with the running game. You had Dayball and McDaniels with the passing game. It was Josh McDaniels' offense. I find that interesting as we approach this year, because I wonder if it doesn't make the most sense for the coach who is spending the most amount of time with Mac Jones to be the one who is in his ear on game days. And so we'll find out. It looks like Joe Judge is going to be the coach who's with this Patriots quarterback group the most. Does that mean he's the best option to be the play caller? I don't know. It could be Matt Patricia. It could be Bill Belichick. But one thing that Castle did tell me before we move on to our next topic that I thought was interesting was that he's never, in 14 years of playing in the NFL, 7 different teams, he's never been on a team that had a play caller who was not in every single quarterback meeting during the week leading up to a game. He said there's just too much that goes on in there in terms of preferences for that week, in terms of discussions that happen about certain matchups, certain play calls that you're comfortable with, suggestions that get made, player to coach, coach to player. There's too much that goes on in there for the play caller on Sundays not to be aware of at all. And so to me, does that mean Matt Patricia can't be the play caller on game days for the Patriots? No. But I understand Castle's point about all the little conversations that happen during the week that lead you into a game and that lead you to potentially successful, or at least more efficient, play calling. Matt Patricia could pull double duty, right? He could be the offensive line coach and still be in on every quarterback meeting, and maybe Joe Judge runs the meeting, Matt Patricia is there and he's giving his input, and then he ends up calling the plays on Sundays. That would feel like maybe an unprecedented situation. I don't know that for a fact, but I don't think that's what was happening, for instance, in 2005. Maybe Bill Belichick is the guy who ends up calling the plays, because maybe he is the guy who's in on every quarterback meeting this year just because he feels like he has to be. But at least he would be in there for every meeting. That to me stood out as, I thought, an important tidbit of information from a guy who's played a lot of quarterback, not only here, but across the NFL, to say, if you're not in those quarterback meetings every day, it could be really difficult to be a successful play caller on Sundays because of everything that happens in those meetings. All right, so for more on that Castle conversation, head on over to NBCSportsBoston.com. I want to look back at that first practice that we had and hear from some of the people involved on a couple of different fronts. Let's talk weight loss and weight gain. Let's do them both, because Mac Jones clearly has thinned out. He told us that he had thinned out. Kendrick Bourne told us that Mac Jones had thinned out, in case we weren't able to see it when he's sitting there in front of us. Let's throw to that Kendrick Bourne sound right now, because he is always entertaining to listen to. We appreciate Kendrick Bourne. Here he is.
Yeah, Mac, and he's also in shape. Everything you said, is way better, and he's in the best shape of his life. I think he's been here all off season with Moses, so he looks really good. His stomach is gone, and he looks really good. He's definitely a pro's pro now. Like when you're a rookie, you just don't know until you go through it for a year. So he's definitely a lot more in shape than he ever was. He's just dominating and conditioning, and it's just dope to see. So he'll just be able to endure more in the game and go through more.
I thought what Bourne said at the end there, where he's going to be able to withstand more essentially during the season because of the changes that he's made to his body, are relevant. But interesting to hear from Mac Jones as well, because he is somebody who said right after, again, the same practice later that afternoon, that he may still bulk up for the start of the season, be able to take the hits. And he talked about that fine line that he has to balance between losing too much weight and maintaining his weight to be able to withstand the punishment of an NFL season. But he's working very closely, obviously, with team nutritionist Ted Harper, who's a really interesting guy, really interesting background. I actually tweeted a story recently right after Vince Wilfork was named a Patriots Hall of Famer, because I featured Wilfork as part of this story on Ted Harper and what the Patriots do in terms of their nutrition. This was all the way back 2014, so things have evolved since then. But Ted Harper is still the guy who is in charge of it all. Go back and read that story if you haven't read it before, because there's some interesting detail in there in terms of just how finely they go over every single player's nutritional needs and how to maximize their performance. You know, they do all sorts of testing with these players, what foods jive with these players, what foods do not, you know, what kind of sleep one player needs versus another. It's really interesting, and it's really tailored to each individual. And there's a lot of work that goes into it. And the Patriots, Craft Sports Productions, their media arm, they put out a Do Your Job special on Ted Harper in the last year or two that I thought was really, really good. And so check that out if you haven't watched it yet. But clearly, Mac Jones has been working closely with Harper. And here's what he had to say in terms of his weight loss, again, which he acknowledged with us the other afternoon.
For me, just cleaning up my diet, and I've learned more this offseason than I probably ever have about nutrition, sleep, wellness, all that stuff. So I'm kind of taking what I learned that, you know, I feel will help me and apply it. And then obviously listening to Ted and everybody, just following their plan, eating healthy, taking out, you know, a lot of the things that are bad for my diet. But at the same time, I need to maintain my weight and be able to take hits. So there's a fine balance for every player. Every player is different. And for me, I've definitely trimmed down on the body fat a little bit, and then I'll get a chance to bulk back up and before the season starts and being able to absorb the hits.
I think this is important to point out because of just the way last year finished, honestly. And we had that ongoing conversation for probably a month. Is Mac Jones hitting the rookie wall? What is the rookie wall? Is it real? Is it not? I don't think there's any question that he had to have been impacted by not just the length of that season, but all of the buildup to his first pro season and everything that he went through at Alabama. And then you're getting ready for pro days and the combine, and you're going through meetings, and it is a whirlwind schedule. And then once you do get to Foxborough, you are grinding day and night on trying to figure out this offense because you're trying to be the starting quarterback, and you're competing with a guy who's won an MVP in the league and who's a massive personality, and all of the stress that is involved with all of that to get to the end of your rookie year. I think it would be really hard not to be worn down to a certain extent, regardless of what kind of physical shape you're in. So is what Mac Jones is doing now going to benefit him late in the 2022 season? TBD, right? We'll see. But I don't think it can hurt. I think there are, the obvious changes that are happening with his body. I mean, even if you just watch that interview that we had with Mac Jones, it's pretty clear if you watched a lot of his interviews last year that his face is thinned out. And good for him. And Bourne talks about his stomach. But I really think it's going to be the not so obvious benefits that really matter to the Patriots when it comes to all this work that Mac Jones is doing on himself. How is he performing late in the season? How is his arm performing when he is forced to throw off platform, with real pressure bearing down on him? These are things that we may not really see until the regular season starts, because the opportunities for true contact with the quarterbacks preseason, even these exhibition games, training camp, it's almost non-existent. So this is stuff that we're going to have to wait and see on. This is stuff that's not going to be clear and obvious in August, I don't think. He's worked with Tom House. He acknowledged that with us. Friend of the podcast, Tom House. Salute to you. But when it comes to his arm strength and those types of things that he would have worked on with House, his mechanics, I'm not sure we will truly see the benefits of those until maybe late in the year. So it's something to just keep in the backs of our minds until then. Okay, last thing on weight gain. Now, okay, so we're talking about weight loss with Mac Jones, weight gain with Tyquan Thornton. Let's go back to our buddy, Kendrick Bourne, essentially narrating this edition of the Next Pats podcast and what he had to say about his new teammate this past week.
Tyquan's dope. We're going to get some weight on my guy. But bruh is blazing, though. But no, good attitude also. You know, he's bought in. You can tell he cares. And I think it was a dope pick, man. We need speed, and we need to add that downfield threat, man. So I think he gives us another, that part of the field. So that's another thing, learning from him too. I can learn from him. He can learn from us, and he's in the right place. If he, has the right attitude and applies himself, this type of place will take you to another level.
He's blazing, but they've got to get some weight on that guy, and it's hard to argue with him, right? At 181 pounds, I mean, he is a rare specimen, even for the NFL. I have a list here that I think you guys will find interesting. I'm going to give you the list of 6 foot, so at least 6 foot, but also sub 185 pound receivers at the combine over the course of the last 20 years. It's a short list prior to Tyquan Thornton. It's Devontae Smith last year, D.D. Westbrook, it's Mario Manningham, and it's Brandon Lloyd, former Patriot Brandon Lloyd. So those are your long, skinny receivers. I would say, on the extreme end of skinny, right? To have only 4 players fit that criteria in the last 2 decades prior to Tyquan Thornton just tells you how rare it is to see those types of body types in the league. But now let's give you the list of sub 4.3 second 40 wide receivers at the combine in that same time span, last 20 years. Again, not a very long list. John Ross, Rondell Menendez, Brashad Perriman, Jerome Mathis, Dree Archer, Marquise Goodwin, Anthony Schwartz, Mike Wallace, Jacoby Ford, J.J. Nelson, and Johnny Knox. So you'll notice no repeats from the tall but skinny list, right? So Tyquan Thornton is in a league of his own. He is the only guy who meets both criteria, sub 4.3 second 40, sub 185 pounds at least 6 feet. So we've never seen anything like him in the league. I mean, that is not hyperbole to say. I just don't know how it should make any of us feel as Patriots observers. And I think that's fair too. I mean, the athleticism is clear. The speed is clear. But does it work? Does it work at that size? And I think especially against press coverage, where he's coming from the Big 12, not a conference known for its defense, especially its pass defense, right? It just isn't. And the amount of press coverage seen there isn't going to be the same as it is at a place like the SEC, where, aggressive cornerbacks at the line of scrimmage that want to get their hands on you, you see, maybe not on a weekly basis, but probably more than you would see in most other conferences across the country. So I wanted to ask Troy Brown, who it sounds like, even though he's not giving us his title, but it does sound like he's going to be the Patriots receivers coach this year, based on what we heard from some of the players this past week. I wanted to make sure I asked him about press coverage and how somebody like Tyquan Thornton might be able to make a leap in that regard, or be able to adjust to the league in that regard, how quickly that can happen. Let's hear from Troy right now.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's a little different than what they do in college. I mean, a lot of young kids that come out of college now, I don't know if they see a whole lot of press coverage or not, but it's not something that I don't think colleges do a whole lot. But it's a learning process, and it's the attitude that the player has when he comes out. That like I said earlier, is what they put into it is probably what they're going to get out of it. How much they want to learn, how much they want to be taught, how hard they want to be taught, and it really comes down to the individual player, how they adapt to playing in this league. So, in this league, you just coach them and you whatever, try to give them tools, and then it's up to them to go out and execute it. And And if it's something that they struggle with, they got to go out and they got to continue to prepare and work at it, and willing to be work at it. And again, willing to be coached. So, and willing to be pushed hard through it. So not every person has that type of an attitude or that type of personality.
Okay, so great exchange with our friend Troy there. Again, another friend of the podcast. They're everywhere, the Next Pats podcast crew. Interesting just to hear him acknowledge, okay, it's been 3 days. So, and we're not in pads, right? So it's hard to know anything about Tyquan Thornton and his level of strength, his ability to block, his ability, these are things he did at Baylor. He did block at Baylor. He's totally willing. I have no questions about, at least to this point, I have no questions about his willingness or his grit or his toughness. I know that's one thing. Friend of the podcast, Greg Cosell, liked about Tyquan Thornton. He's a tough player. He works over the middle. He's willing to do that sort of stuff. He's willing to block downfield. So all of those things are good places to start for a young player here in New England. But at 181 pounds, how does it play? And I think there's one story, because it's recent, that I feel like we can look at and say it's not unrealistic for this player, even as a rookie. Okay, maybe it's asking a lot, but I don't think it's unrealistic for him to put on significant weight. And I would love to hear more from people with the team, and I will do my best in order to dig. But how much of a focus is it to change Tyquan Thornton's body as soon as he gets to the NFL? Because it can be done. Do they feel like it has to be done? It would be my question. And the reason why we know it can be done is because of Hollywood Brown. Just a couple of years ago, Hollywood Brown is in the 150s, I believe, coming to the Ravens, and he goes through a rookie year where he's dealing with injury off and on. He actually came into the league, drafted with an injury, plays through it, has an okay rookie year, and then going into his second year, he puts on 23 pounds in the matter of a few months. He works with a trainer named Daniel Harper. This is according to a story from Jamison Hensley, who's the beat reporter for the Ravens from ESPN, and put on 23 pounds. He's still a very light player because that 23 pounds got him to 180 pounds, but he's much shorter than somebody like Tyquan Thornton. And so 180 at his size plays a lot better and made him look a lot more physically well-developed and well-suited to take hits and to last for a full NFL season. And he did. His second season, he didn't crack 1,000 yards like he did in his third season last year, but his second season in 2020, he averaged 13.3 yards per catch. That's the best figure of his career. He had 8 touchdowns. That's the most of his career. He was targeted 100 times. He caught 58 passes for 769 yards. Last year, he was targeted way more. He was targeted 146 times, and he had about 30 more catches for 1,000 yards. But when you're looking at the jump, that year 1 to year 2 jump, you saw it statistically, I think in part because you saw it on the scale. And just to give you an idea of what he had to do to get there, he had to up his diet to about a 4,000 calorie per day diet of quote unquote eating clean, something we heard from Mac Jones. So no more McDonald's. He was a big McDonald's fan, I guess. But this is the schedule of eating that was laid out by Hensley in this piece on Hollywood Brown. Breakfast around 7:30, 4 boiled eggs and oatmeal. Snack 9:30, protein shake, 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. Lunch at noon, a protein, meaning steak, chicken, or lamb with rice, potatoes, and greens. A snack at 2 o'clock, so 2 hours later. So he's essentially eating every 2 hours here. A protein shake, 10 ounces of almond milk with 1 banana, 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. It sounds pretty good. I'm actually starving right now, so let me add some of this stuff. Dinner a couple hours later at 5 o'clock, more steak, chicken, and or salmon with rice, potatoes, and greens, and then a snack at 7:30, which is another protein shake, same as the one before. So 4,000 calories. I mean, you're eating all the time. And this isn't exclusive to just players like this. You talk to certain offensive linemen, Nate Solder, I know, guys that really had to work to keep the weight on. This is the kind of thing they're doing. They're even, doing even more than this to be able to stick at 315 pounds or 320 pounds or whatever it was. Solder is part of that story that I mentioned earlier that I did on Ted Harper and the team's nutrition plan a few years ago. So it's remarkable what some of these guys do in order to put on weight. Does Tyquan Thornton get asked to do something similar? And if he is, does he buy in? Does he do everything he needs to do? It's a big jump going from the college ranks to the pro game. But can he flip that switch if they're going to require him to do that? They may say, let's see how it works. Let's see how it goes at 180. We brought you here because you're fast. We don't want you to lose any of that speed because we're weighing you down with 4 protein shakes a day. So I think there's a balance there, just as Mac Jones described, a balance that he's going to have to strike between losing weight, being in great shape, but also maintaining, I shouldn't say losing weight, but losing body fat, but being in great shape and maintaining his weight so that he can withstand hits. The same would be true, I would imagine, at the receiver position. But he's clearly, from our first look at Tyquan Thornton the other day, some of the skinniest legs you'll ever see on a football field. And he was limited in the team periods of practice. And I wonder if he might be dealing with a little something. He just did not look particularly fast going through some of the drills and some of the bags that, the rest of his receiver teammates were doing. It did look like, not that he was laboring, but he just did not look as explosive as somebody who runs a 4.2 would look doing those sorts of things. So we'll sort of monitor his health and his status moving forward. But I did just want to give you that Hollywood Brown example because we have seen a young player put on a lot of weight in a pretty short period of time before and have that lead to good results. I don't remember anybody talking about Hollywood Brown in his second year being all of a sudden slower than he was as a rookie. And again, the numbers would bear that out. He had a good year in that second year and he played all 16 games. There you have it. There's your coaching update from Matt Castle. Appreciate him looking back to look ahead. Then we had some body composition talk here on Expats. I mean, who doesn't love a little bit of that as we head into Memorial Day weekend and as everybody's getting ready for the beach, right? With Mac Jones and Tyquan Thornton. Let's get to a couple questions very quickly because we don't want to keep you guys too long. And I know it looks like I'm about to go out and hit some golf balls. I promise I'm not. I wish I was. Going to do a little bit of early edition here in a little bit. And I'm wearing a collar and I'm comfortable as all get out in this thing. It is glorious right now. Loving the weather these days. Hopefully you are as well. But enough of that. Let's get to the mailbag. Let's hear from M.A. Chris Collins, who says, Phil, what do you view as the biggest position concern, headed into the season? I'd like to see some more depth on the defensive line other than Barmore. Not a whole lot of juice there. So, Chris, I'd have to agree with you. I would say the position to me that probably is most concerning is the edge spot. You have Matt Judon there, which we know, and he should be a more than capable player for you. He should be, again, I think, a Pro Bowl level player for you, even though he really fell off at the end of last year. That's what you're hoping to see from somebody making what he's making. On the other side is where I have some questions. We saw Dietrich Wise a lot on the edge with Matt Judon not being part of that first OTA practice. Dietrich Wise was on the edge, and Josh Uche was on the other quite a bit. But Josh Uche was also used as an inside linebacker quite a bit in that practice. And we didn't see Ronnie Perkins at all. So my question is, who's your second edge defender? Is it Wise opposite Judon? He's a capable guy. We know that. This does still feel like an outside linebacker scheme, though. And Wise is really more of a 4-3 defensive end, somebody that you use in sub packages, maybe a little bit more of a situational player. Is it Uche? Is he going to be used inside? How does that group shake out? So that to me is one that's a very valuable position on any roster. Who's playing the edge of your defense? It's one of the most expensive positions in the sport for a reason. That's the spot that I would be looking at right now. Corner to me would be a close second. I just think at least at corner, you have a variety of players that have played starting caliber football before. Whereas on the edge, after Judon, I'm not sure. Again, unless it's Dietrich Wise, and maybe they change their scheme a little bit so that he's playing starter snaps this year. We'll see. Nick Stano checking in. He says, why is the media seemingly hellbent on needing to know who the OC will be in May? Nick, I would say it's as easy as this. You have a second-year quarterback. His development is the most important aspect of where your franchise is going and the most important predictor of where you're headed as a team. I'm not sure people are all that concerned about the actual play calling responsibilities right now because it is a ways away. But that is vitally important, as we know, in terms of just how highly regarded some of the best offensive coordinators across the league are. And the league tells you that those people are that important to the league because of who becomes head coaches in the league and who's making the most money in the league. Those are the most coveted positions in the game after head coach. They don't have one right now. I would just look at those two primary factors. It's the Mac Jones development factor, and it's the fact that the play calling stuff does matter. And the two guys that are vying for this, apparently vying for this, have no experience with it. And it looks like they're going to not have all of the spring reps at it. It gets back to a little bit to the conversation we had with the quarterback position last year. It's all well and good to have a quarterback competition and make sure you're having, the right person in that job when the season starts and it all matters. But you're also necessarily reducing the number of reps for whoever it is that ends up in that role in September by not making a decision on it right now. And to me, I know Bill Belichick said we're months away. It doesn't matter. Minicamp plays. Who cares about them? They are calling play. They're calling plays. They're not game planning. They're not preparing for a defense. There are play calls that are happening. There are meetings. These are practices. This is the precursor to training camp. We can't sit here for 20 years and say it matters, it matters, it matters. You have to be there. Tom and Gronk don't show up. It's a big deal. We talk about it on this podcast, on others. We talk about it with guys like Troy Brown and Gerard Mayo. It matters. The spring matters. It's where you lay the foundation. Now, all of a sudden it doesn't. That to me is, where some of the arguments against the necessity of having an offensive coordinator fall a little flat. I thought this time of year mattered. I do think this time of year matters. I know this time of year matters, and I know the team feels the same way. I think the reason Bill Belichick hasn't done it yet, and this gets to a question from Josh Medeiros in terms of naming the play caller. He says, honestly, are the Patriots punking us in the league with this shared coaching, no coaching title concept? What is driving this approach that no other team in history has tried to pull off? That might be a little strong, Josh. I think there have been questions about team staffs going into the year before. But I think what's driving it is, number one, Bill Belichick's not sure which way he's going to go. And that is a totally reasonable approach, because how could you? Neither of these guys that you're looking at as potentially running your offense have never done it before. So leave yourself that open door to whether it's going to be Joe or Matt or you yourself as Bill Belichick making that decision. That's okay. But it's fair to have those questions asked as well. It's fair for us to wonder which direction you're headed, because it is important. It is that important. But that's why I think we don't know yet. That's why Joe Judge is telling us he doesn't know who the play caller is going to be. It's why Matt Patricia tells us he doesn't know who the play caller is going to be. I'm not sure that decision's been made. If it has been, I'm not sure why you don't just go ahead and let those guys run the offense throughout the course of an entire practice, because that didn't happen the other day. Or let them call the plays when it's competitive team drills, as opposed to having Bill Belichick do it. So we'll see which way they end up going. I just think I'm not sure everything's been decided yet. So I think that's why we're seeing the approach we're seeing right now. I also mentioned earlier, I think the titles thing doesn't happen for some of these guys because Bill Belichick doesn't want to put that kind of pressure on them, number one. And I think sometimes it may have to do, I don't know this for a fact, but when we're sitting here talking about this as much as we do, I think if you give somebody an offensive coordinator title or defensive coordinator title, you have to pay those guys like offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators too. And money is always a factor. Okay, Jake Hamilton says, which non-Mac Jones player do you think needs to make the biggest leap on offense or defense this year to give the Patriots a shot at competing for a playoff spot? To me, it's the offense, even though we'll get to the defense in a second. That to me is the bigger concern overall. But to truly compete, I think you truly have to have an elite offense. And I don't think the Patriots are quite at that level yet. I think they were better than people gave them credit for last year. You look at some of the numbers that would bear that out, but I don't think they were quite at true contention level last season. So if it can't be Mac Jones in terms of who needs to make the biggest leap, it's got to be somebody, in my opinion, in that receiver room. And I'm looking at two guys that weren't even here last year. So I don't even know if you would call this a leap that they need to make. But I think either Devontae Parker or Tyquan Thornton or both need to make a significant impact in 2022 to help take their offense to the next level. I think Kendrick Bourne, if you're talking about year one with the Patriots to year two with the Patriots leaps, let's look at Kendrick Bourne. I think Kendrick Bourne has the potential to do more for you offensively than he did last year. I like the way he finished. He has a great relationship with Mac Jones, is my understanding. They've spent a lot of time together. I think he's a good yak player. I think he finds another gear. He changes speeds when the ball is in his hands. I think all of those things could set him up for a big second season with the Patriots. Okay, rapid fire here for a few more. Seti Anari is asking if Bill Belichick will be the play caller. What sort of offense will he run? And also, will he game plan with Mac as he's done with Brady in the past? I'm sure he's going to be spending a lot of time with Mac Jones this year. He already has. He's shown us that on the practice field. It's going to be the Patriots offense. Patriots offense is what it is, what it has been for a long time. They will emphasize certain things. They will tweak certain things, but it will be that game plan offense with a drop back quarterback that relies on a varied run scheme that uses both gap and zone concepts, that uses a lot of play action, that tries to just take advantage of whatever it is the other team doesn't do very well. But it's not going to be this overhauled, entirely different offense. I don't think it's ever going to be with Bill Belichick here. I really don't think it's ever going to be. You never say never, because they've run 2 tight end offenses and 2 back offenses and spread, and they mix it up, and they have mixed it up over the years as well as anybody, if not better. But it would surprise me. Let's just say that it would surprise me if suddenly they became a Shanahan style offense with a lot of wide zone and bootleg and play action. I think they of course they have that in the arsenal. Will that be the basis of what they do? That would surprise me a little bit. If they were to go to an RPO attack the way that Miami has and Tua, that to me would be surprising too. Although they have the ability to run that. Josh McDaniels told us that last year, but they're going to do what they do, no matter who's calling the plays. Brian Bennett says, Phil, what's the story with Sean Wade? Sounded like a guy with a lot of upside on arrival. Haven't heard anyone mention his name in months. He did have a lot of upside upon arrival, and I think he still has upside. Inside out versatility. He's trying to figure out what he was going to be when he first got here. I think there was some disagreement in the building in terms of what he might be best suited to do. He ended up, it looked to me like more of an outside corner, a boundary corner option, but played a lot of slot in college. So maybe they're still trying to figure that out. I'm not sure he's shown them enough to be considered a starting level player. Otherwise, you don't see the investments that they made in corner. Not that they were through the roof, but you don't see them throw money at Terrence Mitchell and Malcolm Butler if they had a year with Sean Wade, which essentially they had, and they say this guy's the guy. So that to me, it looks like their top 3 guys right now are Butler, Mitchell, and Jalen Mills. Karen K Diva KOS says, Phil, what's the bigger concern? Rudderless O, in parentheses, she writes, okay, extreme, or the D that could not force the Bills to punt. I don't feel as if the D got overwhelmingly better in the offseason, although at least it has consistency in coaching. My gut is the defense, she says, coaching concerns. Sorry, she says, despite the offensive coaching concerns. I'm with Karen. To me, I go off what Bill Belichick says. It's players' league. It's players' game. Players win games. Coaches lose them. I believe that. I believe him when he says that. And so to me, the better players, the more talent is on the offensive side for the Patriots. That to me is pretty clear right now. Regardless of what's going on with the coaching staff, they've got enough talent there offensively to be a good team. A great team, a Super Bowl contending team, we'll see. But they've got enough to be good. To me, there's no doubt about that. Last one here. Phil, what did you make of Bourne's comments that there's new terminology with the Patriots offense? Let's throw to the Bourne comments right now, just so you have a chance to hear them all for yourselves.
I think it's just the challenge is always learning something new. Yeah, it's like, I learned something new last year and then learning something new again. It's just a challenge in itself, but football is just football. It's all kind of the same, just different terminologies. Joe has different words he uses, different terms. So football is football, and it's just about knowing the new words and taking those old words away and applying the new ones.
Okay, the challenge is learning something new terminology. I get why your ears might perk up when you hear that, because in my opinion, that's not what you want to hear as a Patriots fan. It's sort of flies in the face of why you would bring in Matt Patricia and Joe Judge to run your offense, is to have that consistency, right? Do what you do. And I do believe we'll do that. So I don't want to overreact to this, but I understand why you might highlight those comments in your mind. I don't think this means every word, every concept, every play in the Patriots playbook was listed as one thing under Josh McDaniels, and now will be a completely different language, and everyone's going to have to do the translation in their heads. There may be a few things where Joe Judge, who knows, picked up certain terms from Jason Garrett in New York. Or maybe there was something Jerry Shaplinski, who used to work here in New England, brought with him to New York while he was with Joe Judge. He said, this makes more sense. Let's call this that. And now Joe Judge is making a change here. Maybe something Joe Judge grew up with in Jersey or at Mississippi State. He said, this makes more sense if we call this. But I'm going to do some asking and do some poking around and see what that means. Because if it is significant, if the amount of terminology that has changed is significant, that to me is a little bit of an issue. That should be what you have avoided by bringing in these familiar faces to run your offense. Even though they're not necessarily all that familiar with the Patriots offense, they should be, in my mind, this is how I sort of pictured it going. They should be willing and open to maintain as much consistency as possible in order to benefit Mac Jones and the players who were here last year. So to me, there shouldn't be that much new knowledge being poured into the brains of Kendrick Bourne and Nelson Aguilar and Jacoby Myers and Mac Jones. But we'll see. We'll try to find that out. How much new is there exactly? Because maybe that creates more of a speed bump than we anticipated there being when it came to the players who are already here and already established themselves in New England and had understood this offense. Maybe there's more there. Maybe there's a little bit more work, to be done on that front. Okay, we got a bunch of great questions from you all for the mailbag this week. The written version of the mailbag will be posted. If it's not right now as you're listening to this, it will be posted online very soon. So keep an eye out for that. Look out for that Castle piece, that Ted Harper Patriots nutrition piece that I tweeted a few days ago after Will Fork went into the Patriots Hall of Fame. So a lot of homework for you guys this week on the Next Pats podcast. Hope you all can appreciate that as graduations are happening across the country. But I know you guys are that dedicated that you're willing to put in the time and the effort. We really appreciate you guys. Thanks for listening. It's been a little bit of a rambling pod, but thanks for checking in. Rate, comment, subscribe. Tell your friends as we get into the warmer months, the summer months. People are making road trips. Hopefully we can bring Next Pats to as many people as possible. The audio version, for those of you watching on YouTube, we appreciate you as well, and we'll talk to you all very soon.